I want to go to something absolutely fascinating. You know, in all of this discussion in the last month about Mike Pence could have, Mike Pence should have, Mike Pence had a duty to overturn the 2020 presidential election results. And of course, he didn't have that ability, and he certainly didn't have the duty to do it. One of the things that is increasingly being mentioned is, well, if Mike Pence could effectively choose the winner of an election, then that means Kamala Harris could do the same thing. In 2024, Kamala Harris could decide who wins, understanding that it's not just she says, I award the presidency to whoever, by strategically choosing to reject the ballots from certain states and send them back for an alternative slate of electors. You guys understand it's a little bit more nuanced than just the vice president chooses. Well, Donald Trump, former Donald Trump economic advisor Peter Navarro, appeared on MSNBC and was interviewed by Ari Melber. And this is really good because Ari Melber just says to him, well, I mean, if Pence could do it, then Kamala Harris could do it, right? And Peter Navarro twists himself into an incredible pretzel.
Sure. To put a final note on this section,
yes,
it would follow from your contention that you think Vice President Harris will ultimately have the call over who should be president, regardless of the results in the next election?
See, you misconstrued the whole Green Bay sweep plan. It's not for the vice president to determine who wins, okay? The only thing that Pence had the authority to do is go back to the states and let the states look at the votes. It's the states in our Constitution who have the right to decide who won an election.
But you're not answering.
But which states were they that he had the right to do that with? And on what basis was he going to say, I'm sending this back to the states? Because remember, all the legal challenges that were filed at the state levels were found to be without merit.
The question. It seems like the question when you put it on Harris makes you, Peter,
to ask for a second.
Yeah, it seems like it makes you, but it seems like it's making you stretch when we just change the name from Pence to Harris. Are you holding the contention? Wait, let me finish the question. You'll get to respond. Peter, let me finish the question.
Authority to change the election results.
Let me finish the question.
That was not the premise of our argument. Ari,
so
the
under your premise, Peter,
let's take a second look.
Right. So let's say that. Under your contention, Vice President Harris could take any states that her side lost and selectively send those back. That's your current contention?
If any vice president under the Electoral Count Act of 1887.
We'll get to that act, by the way.
If there are objections that are raised about a state's electors, the provision is that you have 2 hours of debate.
Now, the problem with this, if there are objections raised, they raised objections without merit only in certain states. So, of course, if the shoe were on the other foot and Kamala Harris said, well, you know what? We have objections that have been raised in Florida and Ohio, and I'm going to send them back. People like Peter Navarro would be out there saying, but those objections aren't legitimate. And that's the issue, because he says, well, if objections have been raised, the vice president can say we're sending it back. And I don't know, in Arizona, their plan was to just say we're going to send you Republican electors. The question is, who determines the legitimacy of those objections? And none of the objections raised by these Trumpists in Arizona or Michigan or wherever were found to have any merit. Now, I want to mention one other piece. He says the Electoral Count Act of 1887. The Electoral Count Act of 1887 was put in place because 9 years prior, there was a disputed election. And it took 9 years, and they put together this act in 1887. It puts the onus of solving disputes on the states. It doesn't say that if there is a state dispute, the VP can say, we're sending Arizona back, send us the Republican electors. That was their plan. The Electoral Count Act is very narrow, and these Trumpists don't care. Now, you go to the rallies and they repeat it. Electoral Count Act of 1887. The Electoral Count Act of 1887 says, if there is a dispute, like, for example, in Arizona, the vice president could say, we're going to send this back to resolve the dispute in the state. But the disputes that the Trump people put together in places like Arizona were found to be without merit, you don't get to say, well, there is a dispute, so we're going to ignore the 9 or however 7 electoral votes for Biden from Arizona, and instead we'll accept 7 electoral votes for Trump. That's not how it works. And the entire framing of what that Electoral Count Act did is being completely bastardized by these people. You probably know that. So not surprising when confronted with, well, if Pence could get to pick, doesn't Kamala get to pick? He says, well, it depends on whether there are disputes, right? But who decides if the dispute is legitimate? Well, they do. Apparently they do, and Mike Pence was supposed to decide that. We'll have this clip on our Instagram. If you've just been listening today, find us on Instagram at David Pakman Show.